Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 5 Countdown video. Today our analyst will be listing the top 5 compositions for patch 1020. While set 4 has shown that there's a multitude of viable builds, there are a few standing out above the rest. Among those is a lot of emphasis on the Spirit trait as it enables several champions and synergies. With all that said, let's dive on in. But before we go back to the video, don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back into the video. We're beginning with the number 5 composition on today's list, Vanguard Mystic. At the heart of this composition is Ahri as the main carry. So you may hear the build referred to as Ahri Vanguard Mystic or simply Ahri Carry. Unlike other builds that use Spirit to assist another synergy or champion, in this build you're using Ahri as the main damage dealer. The core composition should have Ahri, Yuumi, Sejuani, Thresh, Aatrox, and Cassiopeia. With those champions, you get a strong frontline, Mystic, Spirit, Dusk, and a lot of crowd control. From there, it's usually dependent upon what others are playing in the lobby. Need more frontline? Add extra Vanguards and go towards 4 or 6. Lots of magic damage? Play 4 Mystic. Whichever route you go with, at the center of the build is Ahri, which means you're going to want to level to 7 quickly and try to roll for her before others can contest you. That does mean you shouldn't try to force this comp and instead play it as a natural pivot at level 7 if you hit Ahri. Ideally, you'll find a chosen Ahri, otherwise look for Vanguard or Mystic as your chosen. For items, you will absolutely need at least one Jeweled Gauntlet on your Ahri to increase her overall damage. A second one does well, or you can go for blue buff to help her cast earlier in the fight. But hands down, the most important item is Guardian Angel, as Ahri can finish casting her ability during the resurrection effect of GA. This guarantees at least one Ahri ultimate per fight, which is usually enough to win. Overall, this is a more generalized variation of the many Ahri and Spirit compositions that are playable. It's defensive in slow plays fights to eventually win out. With Ahri 2 and good items, it's unlikely that you'll consistently top 3 with it, but if you treat it as a composition you can pivot to during the mid game, you can easily top 4. Next up is Ashe Brawler as the number 4 composition for today. Ashe is still doing well as a carry, and the meta eventually settled on Brawlers being the superior version compared to 6 Elderwood. But there has been a spike of popularity in leaning into Elderwoods over Brawlers for their increased defensive stats. That said, the most common you'll likely see is still Ashe with 6 to 8 Brawlers. Essentially, why this build does so well is that not many champions can chew through all the beefy frontline that you get with the Brawlers. By positioning Ashe in the corner and surrounding her, you keep her safe from shades or assassins while she can freely DPS each round. Alongside Ashe, you'll want to prioritize grabbing Warwick, Nunu, Maokai, and Set. The first 3 give you Elderwood and Hunter, and Set is just one of the best late game champions and a must-have for this composition to succeed in the late game. It is also viable to run a 3rd Hunter like Kindred, but try not to go over 3 Hunter as the trait doesn't really scale that well. Items to look for include Giant Slayer, Rage Blade, and Hand of Justice. The important item to prioritize for the mid and late game is going to be Quicksilver, as you need it to prevent crowd control from messing with your Ashe. Other items to look for include Sunfire Cape for the early game, Deathcap or Jeweled Gauntlet for your Set so he does a ton of extra damage, or just utility and defensive items in general. All in all, the Ashe Brawler composition is a solid and consistent build to play in the current meta. It's definitely fallen off on how well it can do, but it is overall strong enough to earn you a consistent top 4. Up next is the Spirit composition as the number 3 build, Spirit Shade. Ah yes, Spirit. Spirit as a trait has really exploded in popularity once players realized how well the attack speed buff scales on certain champions and traits. And the realization that, hey, if you put Ahri in the front line, she will cast early and do a lot of damage, almost like Gangplank from set 3. All of these factors have made a meta that heavily favors Spirit and seems to be the case in 1020, despite a nerf to 4 Spirit. Alright, back to the build. Spirit Shade is really simple, as you want 4 Spirit champions, and Zed is a chosen Shade. Throw in Evelynn and Kayn later on, and your composition fills out nicely with 4 Spirit and 4 Shade. Beyond those 2 synergies, you can play Mystic, Dusk, or just good frontline champions like Sejuani. This is one of the stronger compositions currently, but it does require you to hit Shade as your chosen, preferably on Zed. On top of that, you will ideally want to get Zed 3 at some point. And on top of that, you want specific items for your Zed. So all of that combined together is why Spirit Shade is only number 3 on our list. Since we mentioned items, the 3 that you specifically want for Zed are Quicksilver, Rageblade, and Rapid Fire Cannon. Rageblade can be replaced by any damage item, but RFC and Quicksilver are must-haves for Zed to do well. Of course, Ahri is going to be the second champion to prioritize items on. As we've discussed earlier, you should aim to have a Guardian Angel for her, along with a Jeweled Gauntlet if possible. Overall, Spirit Shade is a niche spirit build since it's hard to force without a Zed being chosen. It is doable, but to place consistently with it, don't try to force it every game, and instead play it in the times that you early roll Zed as a chosen champion. The composition coming in at number 2 on today's list is Dusk Riven. Good old reliable Riven is still doing well in the current meta. A large reason for this is simply due to the fact that Riven and Dusk are quite flexible. As long as you get a Riven with at least 4 Dusk, the rest of your comp can be filled in with whatever you need to counter other players. Riven is just an all-around great champion. She may need a little bit of help doing damage though, so look to play Jhin or Ahri in the mid-game and later on add in legendary champions like Kayn or Set. Kayn in particular is quite strong if you manage to secure a Dusk spatula for him. In terms of what your core champions should be, the only ones you absolutely need are Riven, Thresh, and Cassiopeia. Vayne generally sits in to provide for Dusk unless you manage to find a Dusk chosen. Beyond those champions, you can honestly play anything. Add Mystic, Frontline, Legendary Champions, Cultist, or Sharpshooters, just to name a few options. Basically, scout the lobby and see what other players may be weak to and toss it in your comp. It does need to be addressed that Riven 3 was nerfed in 1020 rather significantly, which may mean that she's not a free win anymore if you do manage to 3-star her. So make sure you're playing for other champions and not banking entirely on Riven to carry you. And the last composition for today, coming in at number 1, is Aphelios Spirit. Alternatively, it can be called Moonlight Spirit, but quite frankly, the other Moonlight champions are meaningless here. It's all about Aphelios and buffing him up to either a 3-star or 4-star while Spirit boosts his attack speed. Despite Moonlight not really mattering, it's still ideal to grab a Moonlight chosen as it makes hitting a 4-star Aphelios much easier. You can likely guess what you need for this composition to do well. Aphelios with 4 Spirit is the basic build. Add in the Moonlight champions to artificially increase your Aphelios' star level, and there you have it. Now all you need to do is upgrade your champions, specifically Ahri and Aphelios. While this is certainly one of the stronger compositions currently, it does have limitations. Aphelios needs certain items to truly do well, and those are Guardian Angel, Rageblade, and Quicksilver. While you can get away with a few of those missing, it's going to make the late game much harder. Not to mention that you need a second Guardian Angel for your Ahri. That all said, it is still a super good composition and one that you're going to see players contest for every single game. Try not to force it, especially if anyone else is looking like they may be playing it. If you have somewhat good components for the build and you hit an early Moonlight, then it's a great build to try out and likely place in the top 2. That is going to be it for our top 5 compositions in the current meta. Don't fret though, as there's plenty of builds that you can go for, as the chosen mechanic is so good at enabling a trait or champion to do well. Let's touch on a few of those builds with our honorable mentions. Up first is just a nod towards the various reroll builds out there. It's possible to play Wukong, Vigor, Duelist, Mage, and several other reroll builds and place highly with them. Generally speaking, you shouldn't play these builds often unless you're able to find specific chosen traits for them. The largest downside to these builds is how hard it is to find a specific chosen. And if you're able to find a good chosen, it's still more likely that you'll get outscaled by 4 and 5 cost champs later. So look to play these builds where you can find the ideal chosen for them and have a good early game for them. If those pieces fall into place, it should net you a top 4 finish. Moving on, we have Talon Enlightened as another honorable mention. Talon and Enlightened was dominating the release of set 4 until players began forcing Ashe Brawler and other defensive builds. This caused Talon to drop off as he wasn't really reliable enough. But now that there's less Ashe and more Spirit builds, Talon has returned to being viable. Unfortunately, as a whole, this composition doesn't always do that well. While Talon is an okay champion, Morgana as your secondary damage dealer can be lacking at times. The main issue is that the common trait to play with this build, Dazzler, is not going to do much in the current meta. It can be okay, but don't expect much from it. Overall, Talon is great for playing into Spirit-heavy lobbies, but weak into lobbies that have multiple Ashe players. Make sure you scout and decide whether it's worth pursuing this composition or not. And our last honorable mention is Sharpshooters. Sharpshooters can be played either with Spirit or without. Without basically means adding in a lot of good frontline and CC to your build and going for 6 Sharpshooter if possible. With Spirit, it's the same as usual with Ahri in the front line holding onto a Guardian Angel. What hurts Sharpshooters is that they can get bursted down really easily and often struggle against Assassin builds. But if you can avoid those being too big of an issue, then Sharpshooter can pop off either with Jhin as your main carry or Jinx. It's not the safest build to play in the current meta, but it does pack a punch when you're able to get all the relevant pieces. That's going to be all for today's video, folks. While we only covered 5 compositions today, keep in mind that set 4 has many possible compositions. The meta may not shift as often as it did in 1019, but there's still a lot of room for new builds to become viable. Let us know in the comment section below what compositions you've been doing well with. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.